first time Leah tried to explain what was happening in her relationship, she didn't have the language for it. 19 years old, a sophomore on a sprawling Midwestern campus, she thought sex was something you were supposed to grit your teeth through. Proof that you were mature enough to handle what adults did behind closed doors. Her boyfriend was charming and well-liked. People lit up when they heard his name. In private, he liked things brutal. He'd toss her around, slap, choke, push past the word no, and then tell her, patiently, as though teaching this is just how people do it. When she recoiled, he'd insist she was being dramatic. When she cried, he suggested therapy. When she emerged from the bathroom, shaky and ashamed for making a scene, he'd tell her to get it together. The world loved him. That made it harder to trust herself.
Leah had grown up with health class warnings that sounded like punchlines. Don't have sex, or you'll get pregnant and die. What she never got was a map for consent, for desire, for the difference between discomfort and danger. So she came, to believe that strength meant endurance. She told herself that a good partner was quiet, compliant, able to handle whatever he wanted without flinching. And when the bruises appeared, she joked them away. She was clumsy, she said. She bumped into something. She played along. The breakup, when it came, wasn't because of the sex. It was the sort of mundane, unraveling college couples have all the time. Mismatched schedules, dumb fights about nothing. A few months later, a girl in a lecture offhandedly called him a psycho and mentioned the rumors that swirled around him in high school. Leah felt the floor tilt. Suddenly, the scenes she'd been replaying in her head were illuminated from a different angle. The moments she'd stored in a folder labeled normal now read like something else entirely, like a pattern. She spent 2 days in bed, staring at the ceiling as if it were a screen. Memory after memory queued itself up. The certainty in his voice, the way he framed her instincts as immaturity, the way he called his control care, the way the world's admiration for him seeped into her, making her doubt herself before she even dared to ask a question. She didn't yet have a tidy word for what she'd endured, but she could feel the shape of it. Years later, working with college students, she'd give it a name: gaslighting. The word is everywhere now. You hear it in break room whispers and group chats, in couples therapy and comment threads. People use it to describe a boss who rewrites yesterday's decision, a friend who insists the hurtful thing never happened, a partner who says you're misremembering what you know you heard. The popularity of the term tells us something important. There's a shared hunger to name the specific damage that happens when someone messes with your ability to trust your own mind. But popularity comes with a risk. If a word starts to mean everything, it stops meaning anything. When every disagreement becomes, "You're gaslighting me," the concept loses its power to point to the deeper, more invasive act it originally named. So what are we really talking about? At its core, gaslighting is not just lying. It's not even just manipulation. It's an organized effort, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, to make you distrust your capacity to judge reality. Instead of arguing about a fact, the gaslighter goes after your faculties. They don't only tell you you're wrong, they tell you you're unwell, too sensitive, unstable, unreliable. They move the conversation from what happened to whether you can be believed about anything that happens. Over time, that shift hollows you out. You start checking your memory like a faulty mic. Is this on? You replay scenes until the tape wears thin. You apologize for being confused. You outsource your reality to the person who keeps telling you they know better. Leah's story is, tragically, textbook. The performance of tenderness as a delivery system for control. The social proof of a good guy used to insulate him from suspicion. The private monologues that call you crazy for flinching at pain. The way isolation creeps in without ever being named. How you stop comparing notes with friends because you're embarrassed, because he's loved, because you've been told. You're sensitive because you suspect the world will choose him. But there's another layer that makes this phenomenon so slippery. The gaslighter's motives are not always cartoon villain simple. Yes, there are people who consciously aim to dominate, to crush another person's confidence until they're pliable. There are also people who can't tolerate dissonance between who they want to be and what they do, so they twist the story to preserve a flattering mirror. Sometimes those motives overlap. Sometimes the story they sell you is the same one they've sold themselves. That's part of what makes the fog so thick. The gaslighter may believe their own script, which means they can perform it with conviction. The stakes here aren't abstract. When your inner compass is tampered with long enough, you start to drift in very practical ways. You let things slide you'd once have confronted. You neglect the texts to your friends. You forget how it feels to have a thought that doesn't require a permission slip. You start making decisions based on what will keep the peace, rather than what is true to you. And if the gaslighter is skilled, or simply embedded in an environment that backs them up, you can go a long time without noticing the slow erosion. Leah didn't. Not at first. She had the feeling in her gut. She ran to the bathroom. She cried. And then she came back, because coming back felt like the fix. Here's the quiet cruelty. Gaslighting hijacks our most generous capacities. The willingness to entertain that we might be wrong is, in many contexts, a moral strength. It's how we learn and love and coexist. A good argument requires humility. A deep relationship requires the courage to be corrected. Gaslighting weaponizes that humility. It punishes you for having it. The person least certain of their infallibility often folds first. And in the wrong hands, that conscientiousness becomes a lever. In the episodes ahead, we're going to widen the lens. We'll explore where the term came from and why it exploded in the culture. We'll investigate how it shows up not only in romance, but in families, workplaces, and institutions. We'll look at the grey areas where disagreement gets mislabeled as abuse and the very real danger of concept creep, without losing sight of the real devastating version that Leah eventually learned to name. We'll listen to people who found proof years later, and people who never got the proof at all, and still had to rebuild. And we'll ask hard questions about susceptibility, not to blame victims, but to understand what makes any of us vulnerable to surrendering our story to someone else. For now, hold on to this. If you've ever felt that eerie split between what your body knows and what someone tells you to believe, you're not alone. And there's a way back to yourself. To understand why the word sits so neatly on experiences like Leah's, it helps to trace where it came from. Decades before it became a hashtag, it was a plot device. In a moody mid-century thriller, a husband keeps disappearing into the attic at night to hunt for jewels that aren't his. When he lights the gas lamps up there, the flames downstairs dim. His wife notices the flicker. She's observant, sane, attuned, and he tells her she imagined it. Night after night, she sees evidence. Day after day, he says there is none. The trick isn't just the lie, it's the slow demolition of her confidence in the faculties she uses to detect the lie. Light, which is supposed to reveal, becomes a weapon of confusion. The house, with its staircases and shadows, becomes the shape of her isolation. By the end, the audience can feel the room tilt the way she does. The title of that old story gave us the modern term, but the mechanism it dramatizes is older than cinema. Any relationship with an uneven balance of power, parent and child, boss and employee, coach and player, doctor and patient, contains the raw materials. The person with more authority controls the map and the lamp. The other person is guided by what they're told the terrain looks like. When the guiding voice is loving and trustworthy, the arrangement can be protective. When it's self-serving, the arrangement becomes a maze. Psychology eventually tried to codify what the movie suggested. Early clinical writing treated gaslighting as a pattern that can emerge when one person cannot tolerate parts of themselves, neediness, aggression, shame, and ships those feelings across the border into someone else. The export is disguised as truth. You're unstable. You're overreacting. You don't remember. The recipient, caring or conscientious or simply dependent, takes delivery. Over time, this trade hollows out the target's capacity to rely on their own perceptions. The more they try to be fair-minded and open to correction, the more susceptible they become. The very virtue that steadies relationships, humility, gets used against them. Then the term left the clinic and sprinted through the culture. It showed up in love songs and TV dramas, in think pieces and advice columns, in awkward staff meetings and couples counseling. People needed vocabulary for a slippery injury, the feeling of being made to doubt your own eyes, and gaslighting fit. Search trends exploded. Memes proliferated. It became a shorthand for anything that felt like denial. A leader rewriting yesterday's statement, a company spinning away an obvious mistake, a friend claiming they never said the thing everyone remembers. The surge was understandable. Naming something makes it less lonely, but the surge brought a hazard too. When every uncomfortable disagreement is labeled gaslighting, the term loses the precision that makes it useful. Disagreement is inevitable. Misremembering is normal. Defensiveness is human. Gaslighting is something narrower and more invasive than all of that. It isn't, you and I recall a night differently. It's, your capacity to recall is defective, and I'm the arbiter of what's real. It's the migration of a conflict from the facts to your fitness to judge any facts at all. That shift is the red line. Consider how easily the larger world can amplify the manipulation within a private relationship. Leah's boyfriend didn't just have charm. He had a crowd that adored him. That social proof functioned like armor. When a person is universally praised, anyone who hesitates to trust them can feel naive, bitter, or prudish. The environment co-signs the manipulator's script. He's generous, he's beloved, you're lucky. Doubt starts to look like ingratitude. This is part of why gaslighting can be so disorienting in schools, workplaces, and public life. A revered mentor refutes a student's account. A friendly supervisor reframes a staffer's clear boundary as a misunderstanding. A clinician waves away a patient's pain. The more reputable the speaker, the more easily the listener second guesses themselves. Sometimes proof arrives like a lifeline. Years after a confusing relationship, a person finds text messages, lab results, corroborating witnesses, hard edges, in a foggy room. Proof can be profoundly consoling. It retroactively validates the body's alarms, but many people never get that clear evidence. They have to rebuild anyway, with nothing more than a gut that refused to shut up and a handful of memories that never stopped glowing. Recovery in those cases is not about winning a courtroom verdict. It's about relearning how to live from the inside out. There's another uncomfortable truth worth naming. Not everyone who gaslights sets out to be a villain. Some do. Others are engaged in a desperate defense of self-image. If admitting harm would shatter their idea of who they are, they bend reality instead. They tell a story in which they remain the hero, and they need you to accept it to keep the story intact. That doesn't lower the stakes or erase accountability. It just explains why the performance is sometimes so convincing, because the actor believes the role. and it helps us understand why these dynamics can be sticky. The story may also offer the target something they've longed for: a stable narrative, a confident voice to follow, a way out of ambivalence. Part of getting free can involve asking, without self-blame, what the story gave you while it cost you. Zooming out still further, you can see how identity shapes vulnerability. People who are routinely told by society that their perceptions are less credible, women reporting pain, people of color flagging bias, immigrants navigating institutions in a second language, young people challenging older gatekeepers, often face an extra headwind when they try to assert reality. Dismissal gets coded as professionalism. Minimization gets coded as calm. You're too sensitive becomes a tidy lid on a roiling pot. When you live under those lids long enough, you begin to hold them down yourself. And yet, as tempting as it is to draw the world in black and white, victims on one side, perpetrators on the other, real relationships are more knotted. In long partnerships, people sometimes take turns selling and buying distorted stories. In families, a parent overwhelmed by stress might tell a child they're fine when they're clearly overwhelmed. Later, the same parent might beg the child to name their feelings. On bad days, we offload our anxiety to the nearest person and pretend they generated it. None of this is an excuse for the kind of sustained coercive pattern that defines true gaslighting. It's a reminder to approach the topic with care, so that the word remains sharp enough to cut where it should, and not so dull that it bludgeons every friction we encounter. So how do you tell the difference in your own life? Start with the direction of the conversation. In a healthy dispute, the question is, what happened? What did you mean? How did it land? In gaslighting, the question slides to, are you capable of knowing what happened? Are your feelings admissible as evidence? Watch for isolation. Does the other person discourage you from comparing notes with anyone else? Watch for moving goalposts. Do definitions and standards change whenever you get close to clarity? And watch your body. Our minds can be coached into doubt. Our bodies are slower to lie. If your shoulders creep up to your ears every time a certain topic comes up, something is asking for your attention. Leah eventually found language and community that validated what she felt in her bones. That didn't erase what happened, but it gave her a handhold she didn't have at 19. In the next section, we'll follow more people finding their way through similar fog, including those who learned painfully that the first person to gaslight them wasn't a partner at all, but someone who raised them. We'll listen to what breaks in a child when a parent insists the lamps aren't dimming, and what it takes, years later, to trust the light again. If you leaf through self-help shelves today, you'll find the word gaslighting stamped across book covers in bold fonts, promising clarity and escape. In the early 2000s, therapists began writing directly for a mainstream audience, drawing from case studies to explain why confident, competent people found themselves doubting their every move in relationships that looked fine from the outside. One of the earliest popular texts, The Gaslight Effect, broke the cycle into stages. First disbelief, then defensiveness, finally depression. The message was stark. What began as confusion often ends in erosion of self. And the perpetrators weren't always obvious villains. Sometimes they were good guys, sometimes glamorous, sometimes just skilled at packaging their control in ways that felt like affection. Pop psychology isn't always precise, but its reach matters. Millions of readers, many of them women who prided themselves on independence, saw their lives reflected in those pages. Suddenly, there was a framework for that gnawing feeling that you weren't simply too sensitive. A therapist was saying, no, what you're experiencing is real, and it has a name. That validation can be life-altering. Philosophy soon joined the conversation, bringing with it a more austere vocabulary. Scholars like Kate Abramson have argued that gaslighting is not just manipulation, but a profound moral violation. It doesn't merely twist a single memory, it undermines your capacity as a moral agent. If your ability to deliberate, to weigh evidence, to trust yourself is dismantled, then your personhood itself is under siege. Abramson describes this as existential silencing. The harm isn't just practical, it strikes at the core of what makes us human. Her work also highlights something many survivors intuit. Gaslighting leverages stereotypes already embedded in society. A woman objecting too forcefully becomes hysterical. A child challenging a parent becomes ungrateful. A worker pointing out bias becomes too sensitive. These tropes are ready-made tools for anyone seeking to discredit another's perception. By the time the victim tries to defend themselves, they're already trapped inside the frame painted around them. But philosophy, for all its rigor, faces its own trap: concept creep. If every sharp remark or dismissive comment is filed under the label, the word stretches too far. Abramson herself catalogues phrases that many have heard. Don't be so sensitive. I'm worried about your mental health. If you're going to be like this, I can't talk to you. On their own, these may be defensive reactions, not organized campaigns of distortion, but in the right or wrong context, repeated and weaponized, they form the backbone of gaslighting. The difficulty lies in drawing the line. Therapists in clinical practice wrestle with this all the time. Patients arrive declaring they've been gaslit, relieved to have a term for their pain. The relief can be real. It's the rush of recognition, the flood of validation. But some clinicians, like psychoanalyst Gila Ashta, caution against sealing the story too quickly. She describes the word as a placeholder. It can be useful, but it shouldn't be the end point. Because while it names the harm, it doesn't always explain why someone stayed in the dynamic, and that why can hold keys to deeper healing. Here's where the conversation gets thorny. To suggest that survivors bring something to the dynamic can sound like blaming the victim. That's not the point. The question isn't, why did you want this? But rather, what did this situation provide, however painfully, that made it stick? For some, the answer might be the comfort of certainty in an otherwise chaotic world. For others, it might be the echo of childhood patterns. Love laced with dismissal felt familiar, even if it was toxic. Ashta puts it starkly. Gaslighting involves a voluntary surrender of narrative, not because the victim desired harm, but because there was an appeal, however unconscious, in outsourcing the burden of interpretation. That idea unsettles people. It suggests that part of the draw of gaslighting is that it momentarily relieves us from the exhausting task of being the author of our own story. Someone else hands us a script. All we have to do is read the lines. Of course, the cost is devastating. The script erases who we are, but the attraction can't be ignored if we want to understand why people remain in these relationships long after the flickering lamps should have made the pattern obvious. There's another arena where the word has stretched, beyond individuals, into systems. Behavioral scientists like Pragya Agarwal argue that gaslighting also operates at a societal level. Marginalized groups are routinely told their realities aren't real. Women who describe menstrual pain are brushed off as exaggerating. Patients of color reporting symptoms are misdiagnosed or dismissed. Workers flagging racism in the office are told they're reading too much into it. Each instance on its own might look like bias or misunderstanding, but collectively, they mirror the private dynamic of gaslighting. Reality is repeatedly denied until the person begins to doubt their own senses. This broader lens raises difficult questions. If society itself is capable of gaslighting, then susceptibility isn't just an individual matter, it's structural. It's about who has power to define reality and who is trained from birth to accept someone else's version. In this view, telling the gaslit to toughen up or to sharpen their radar misses the point. The imbalance isn't inside them, it's in the hierarchy that devalues their testimony. And yet, there's no easy way out of the paradox. If we define gaslighting too narrowly, we risk ignoring the ways it manifests in everyday life. If we define it too broadly, it dissolves into a synonym for conflict. The challenge is to hold both truths. Yes, gaslighting is a specific and invasive act, and yes, it rhymes with more ordinary dynamics of disagreement and defensiveness we all encounter. The line between them may not always be clean, but the stakes of blurring it are high. Survivors need the word to stay sharp. At the same time, the rest of us need humility about the ways we may, even unintentionally, slip into mini versions of it. Think about the parent hustling their child out the door for school. The kid says, "These shoes hurt." The parent, stressed and late, replies, "No, they don't. You're fine." A small moment, not malicious, but structurally similar. The adult's anxiety is displaced onto the child, whose perception is invalidated. Multiply enough of those moments, and the habit calcifies. As Kafka noted, within 2 blocks of any elementary school, you'll find parents gaslighting their kids without even knowing it. That doesn't mean they're abusers. It means the mechanism is more ordinary than we'd like to admit. Perhaps this ordinariness is part of why the term resonates so widely. Nearly everyone has felt the sting of being told they're imagining something that feels real. The leap from that sting to full-blown gaslighting is large, but the echo is close enough that the word feels familiar. The trick is to honor that familiarity without erasing the severity of the real thing. In the next section, we'll examine what gaslighting does to memory, trust, and identity in the long run, and why proof, when it arrives, can feel like salvation. We'll also consider how accusations of gaslighting can backfire, creating a new kind of no-win trap. And we'll return to the original film, where the gaslit finally turns the script on her manipulator to ask, what does it really mean to escape? When we talk about gaslighting, the focus often lands on romantic relationships. The manipulative boyfriend, the domineering husband, the charismatic partner who bends reality to suit their desires. But some of the deepest, most formative cases don't start in romance at all. They begin at home, before dating, before adulthood, when a child's entire sense of reality is still under construction. A parent, after all, is the first authority most of us know. If they say the sky is green, if they say the pain in your ear isn't real, if they say your fear is just exaggeration, what basis do you have to disagree? As a child, you're wired to believe the people who clothe and feed you. To disbelieve them would be to risk safety itself. Take the story of a woman I'll call Adaya. Growing up in Bangladesh, she struggled to hear what other people said. Teachers, friends, even family seemed to move at a frequency that didn't reach her. She wondered if she was stupid, if her mind was slow, if she was somehow built wrong. When she raised her concerns, her parents dismissed her. Her mother said she was being dramatic. A doctor reinforced the dismissal, assuring her she was fine. Teenage girls exaggerate, he added, so she accepted that narrative. She was fine. She was weak for thinking otherwise. The problem wasn't her ears, it was her, except it wasn't. Decades later, now an adult living in the US, she finally saw another specialist. The diagnosis landed like both a wound and a gift. Her middle ear bone had been calcifying since childhood. She hadn't been dramatic at all. She had been living with a congenital condition for 25 years. On the phone, standing in the snow after that appointment, she called her mother. No apology came, just a cool instruction. You're old enough to take care of yourself, so take care of yourself. Only years later did her mother reveal that the original family doctor had noticed something wrong all along. She had chosen not to tell her daughter because she didn't want her to be weak. For Adaya, the betrayal wasn't just the untreated condition. It was the gaslight that smothered her developing sense of self. She had been taught that her lived experience, her body, her hearing, her confusion wasn't real. She internalized shame. She believed she was ugly because her mother said so, dirty because infections were framed as her fault, unworthy because the people she depended on treated her perceptions as fabrications. That fragile self-image made her vulnerable later, pushing her into an abusive marriage because the first man who told her she was lovable felt like a lifeline. Looking back, she describes her childhood self as someone separate, a girl she now feels protective of, as if she were her own child. Therapy gave her the vocabulary, gaslighting, that helped her name what had been happening all along. Naming. It didn't erase the damage, but it allowed her to step out of the script and begin writing her own. Stories like Adaya's illustrate something crucial. Gaslighting doesn't have to be intentional to be destructive. Parents may believe they are toughening their children up, protecting them from weakness, or simply avoiding the inconvenience of acknowledging a child's needs. But from the child's perspective, the effect is the same. Reality gets replaced by the parent's version. Dependence makes contradiction nearly impossible. By the time that child grows into adulthood, their inner compass has been tampered with for so long that any later relationship, romantic, professional, or otherwise, can easily plug into those circuits of doubt. The psychoanalyst Ben Kafka argues that the parent-child dynamic is the most illuminating way to think about gaslighting. Not because all parents are abusers, but because childhood dependency creates fertile ground for this kind of distortion. A child's reality is delivered, prepackaged by their caregivers. To dissent risks abandonment, even if the parent doesn't intend it that way. Kafka also points out that later instances of gaslighting often replicate this childhood pattern. The enforced dependence, the infantilization, the regression into seeking approval from the person who is simultaneously the source of injury. Memoirs often circle this terrain. Writing about one's past can be an act of reclamation, taking back a narrative that was distorted or denied. In Lily Dunn's Sins of My Father, for instance, the gaslighting came from a father who abandoned his family to join a cult, then invited his young daughter into his chaotic adult world. When she told him she was frightened by a much older man's sexual advances, he brushed it off, telling her she could learn something and that the man was a good person. The predator's actions scarred her, yes, but her father's refusal to affirm her alarm left the deeper wound. Later, when she tried to confront him about the damage, he weaponized pseudo-spiritual jargon. You can choose how you feel. It has nothing to do with me. The message was clear. Your feelings are not evidence. They're a problem you invented. For Dunn, this early training meant that as a teenager, she struggled to trust her instincts in relationships. She found herself rationalizing red flags, getting trapped in obsessive thought loops about whether she was paranoid, It wasn't that she lacked intelligence. It was that her foundation for trusting her own perceptions had been undermined by the person who should have safeguarded it. Listening to these stories side by side, you can feel the weight of what's lost. Childhood gaslighting doesn't just hurt in the moment, it warps the tools we carry forward to adulthood. It teaches us that love and dismissal are compatible, that doubt about our own senses is normal, that the safest option is to believe, the authority in the room. That training can echo for decades, in partners we choose, in jobs we tolerate, in friends we keep long past the point of pain. And yet, naming the pattern offers a kind of liberation. Leah, years later, could look back at her 19-year-old self and recognize what had been happening. Adaya could see her childhood as a story she didn't have to keep living. Dunn could map the through line from her father's words to her teenage confusion. Gaslighting thrives in silence and namelessness. When someone finally says, "No, the lamps really were flickering," the fog begins to clear. This isn't to suggest that the word should be wielded loosely. Calling every disagreement gaslighting dilutes the force it carries. But when applied carefully, it can be a light in the tunnel, not only validating pain, but helping survivors chart the path forward. The challenge for therapists, philosophers, and anyone who cares about the integrity of language is to keep the word sharp, not blunt, to use it not as a catch-all for friction, but as a scalpel that exposes a very specific wound. In the next section, we'll explore how scholars and clinicians have wrestled with this definition, how philosophers argue about its moral stakes, how therapists see it play out in their offices, and how pop psychology has sometimes expanded it into an umbrella so wide it threatens to collapse. We'll also look at why people may be drawn into these dynamics, not to blame, but to understand what they might have been seeking in surrendering their own story to someone else's. One of the cruelties of gaslighting is that it doesn't just distort your view of the present, it alters your relationship with memory itself. Survivors often describe years spent replaying conversations in their heads, obsessively checking for cracks in their own recall. Was that how it happened? Did I mishear? Maybe I misunderstood. The longer the dynamic persists, the more fragile memory feels. Instead of being an anchor, it becomes quicksand. And because we build our sense of self out of remembered experiences, that erosion doesn't just cause confusion in the moment, it undermines identity. This is why proof, when it appears, can feel like salvation. For Adaya, the medical chart showing her hearing loss was a kind of resurrection. For Leah, hearing a classmate casually label her ex-boyfriend a predator unlocked a vault of hidden recognition. For others, it's a text message, a diary entry, a witness who corroborates what they felt alone in remembering. These life preservers don't just confirm that the event happened, they confirm that the survivor's mind was trustworthy all along. The relief is enormous. At last, the gnawing suspicion, maybe I am crazy, dissolves. Proof says, no, you were sane. The distortion was real. But proof almost always comes late. Inside the fog, certainty is elusive. And here lies one of the paradoxes of gaslighting. The stronger you insist you're being gaslit, the less likely it is to be true. Why? Because genuine gaslighting erodes the confidence needed to declare it. People who are truly being undermined tend to question themselves relentlessly. Meanwhile, in contemporary culture, it's become common to hurl the accusation casually as a way to end an argument. A teenager might roll their eyes at a parent's rule and cry, "You're gaslighting me." A partner, caught in a lie, might flip the script and accuse the other of gaslighting. The term becomes a trump card, one that shuts down conversation rather than opening it. That's what makes accusations of gaslighting so tricky. They're almost impossible to refute. If someone says you're gaslighting them and you respond, "No, I'm not," you sound like the archetype. If you try to explain, you risk being accused of twisting. Even third parties who dispute the claim may look like they're piling on. It's a conversational trap with no graceful exit. And because the accusation is so hard to disprove, it can be tempting to use it as a blunt weapon, even in situations that don't merit it. Consider a frustrated Reddit post from a man whose girlfriend accused him of gaslighting every time they disagreed. From his perspective, he was simply stating a different opinion. From hers, his disagreement felt like erasure. Who was right? Maybe both in different ways, but the term gaslighting transformed what might have been an ordinary clash of perspectives into a moral indictment. That's the danger. When every disagreement is cast as abuse, we lose the ability to distinguish between ordinary friction and true manipulation. This isn't to minimize how devastating real gaslighting is. It's to emphasize that precision matters. Otherwise, the word risks following the trajectory of another once clinical term, narcissism. A generation ago, narcissist was a diagnosis. Today, it's a cultural insult applied to anyone who seems selfish. The danger of that inflation is twofold. People who are genuinely harmed by narcissistic abuse lose a clear label, and those unfairly tagged as narcissists are flattened into caricatures. Gaslighting could suffer the same fate if it isn't used carefully. And yet, there's a reason the word exploded. Gaslighting rhymes with one of the most universal human frustrations: the pain of disagreeing on reality. Anyone who has argued with a sibling about what happened at a family dinner knows the irritation of clashing memories. Anyone who has fought with a partner over what you said last week knows the despair of two narratives colliding. These experiences are not necessarily gaslighting, but they echo it. The difference is that in healthy relationships, the disagreement doesn't aim to erase your ability to judge reality itself. In gaslighting, that's the whole point. Memory is fragile enough without someone weaponizing it. Psychologists have long shown how malleable recollection can be. Witnesses to the same accident remember different details, and even confident memories can be planted or altered. Gaslighting exploits that fragility. The manipulator doesn't need to change the facts completely, just to seed enough doubt that you hesitate before trusting your own mind. Once that hesitation takes root, it can grow into chronic self-distrust. And here's the hidden betrayal. Gaslighting hijacks our ethical impulse to be humble. Most of us know we're not infallible. We value the ability to question ourselves, to leave room for correction. That humility keeps communities functional. But in a gaslighting dynamic, humility gets turned into a weapon. The person most willing to admit they might be wrong is the person most vulnerable to being convinced they are wrong, even when they aren't. At the climax of the original Gaslight film, Ingrid Bergman's character finally flips the script. Knife in hand, she toys with her husband, repeating his tactics back at him. "Are you suggesting this is a knife I hold? Have you gone mad?" It's a cathartic reversal, the victim pretending to be the manipulator, finally seizing control. On the surface, it's a triumphant ending, but on a deeper level, it reveals how intertwined the roles can become. In long, toxic relationships, people sometimes oscillate between gaslighter and gaslit, each convinced they're the one under siege. It's not always a one-way street, which makes it all the more complicated to untangle. So where does this leave us? With an uncomfortable truth, gaslighting is both rarer and more common than we think. Rare, in the sense that true sustained campaigns of psychological manipulation are devastatingly specific and not to be confused with ordinary defensiveness. Common, in the sense that the mechanics of gaslighting, denial, projection, offloading, appear in miniature across countless daily interactions. Each of us has, at some point, dismissed another person's feeling because it was inconvenient. Each of us has told someone they were fine when they clearly weren't. These moments don't add up to abuse, but they remind us how thin the line can be between ordinary friction and corrosive distortion. The question then is not only how to identify when you're being gaslit, but how to guard against unintentionally doing it to others. That requires a posture of self-examination. Am I dismissing their perspective because it truly seems flawed, or because I'm anxious about what it might reveal about me? Am I asking them to doubt their memory because I doubt mine, or because I can't tolerate admitting fault? These are not comfortable questions, but they may be the ones that keep our own lamps from flickering into someone else's fog. In the final section, we'll bring these threads together. What gaslighting reveals about the fragility of truth, why it spreads so easily in a culture addicted to certainty, and how survivors can reclaim not only their stories, but their trust in themselves. We'll explore how to hold on to nuance without diluting the power of the term, and why admitting that we're all capable of small gaslights may be the first step in preventing the larger, more devastating ones.